The first shot echoed through the San Antonio Valley, announcing the arrival of a dust storm unlike any seen in the past decade. Katherine Wilkins clutched her 5-year-old son tighter against her chest as she urged her tired horse forward through the swirling brown haze that had descended upon them like a vengeful spirit. "Hold tight to me, Henry," she whispered against his ear, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "We'll find shelter soon." The year was 1875, and Katherine had been traveling for 3 days from her family's homestead in East Texas after receiving news that her husband had died in a mining accident near San Antonio. With no means to support herself and her child in their small town, she had decided to accept her late husband's partner's offer of employment at the general store he owned. It wasn't ideal, but it was something a chance to rebuild. The dust storm had appeared without warning, sweeping across the plains like a biblical plague. Katherine's horse, already exhausted from the journey, struggled against the battering wind. "Mama, I'm scared," Henry whimpered, his small fingers gripping her shawl. "Just a little further, my brave boy," she assured him, though her own fear threatened to overwhelm her. The outline of a small structure appeared in the distance, perhaps an abandoned barn or outpost, and Katherine directed her horse toward it with desperate hope. Just as they approached the building, a tumbling branch struck her horse's flank. The animal reared in panic, throwing both Katherine and Henry to the ground. She hit the earth hard, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Disoriented, she reached blindly for her son. "Henry!" She screamed, but the wind swallowed her voice. Through stinging eyes, she saw his small form being swept away by the gusting wind, tumbling across the dusty plain. "Henry!" Katherine struggled to her feet, fighting against the wind that seemed determined to push her back. Her horse had bolted, disappearing into the swirling brown void. She stumbled forward, calling her son's name until her voice grew hoarse, but there was only the howling of the wind in response. For hours she searched, crawling at times when the wind knocked her down, desperate to find any trace of her child. The storm gradually diminished as night fell, leaving her alone in the eerie silence of the aftermath, covered in dust and despair. When dawn broke, Katherine stood on a small rise, her face streaked with tears and dust. Her body ached, her throat burned, and her heart felt shattered beyond repair. In the cold light of the new day, she could see for miles, empty miles, with no sign of her precious boy. "Henry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My baby." Her knees gave way and she sank to the ground, her sobs the only sound in the vast emptiness. She didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats until they were nearly upon her. A tall figure on horseback stopped several yards away, dismounting with practiced ease. The man approached slowly, as if afraid she might bolt like a frightened deer. "Madam." His voice was deep but gentle. "Are you hurt?" Katherine looked up through swollen eyes at the stranger. He wore the dust-covered clothes of a cowboy, worn leather chaps over denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. When he stepped closer, she could see his face weathered by sun and wind, but kind, with eyes the color of a summer sky. "My son," she managed to say between sobs. "My little boy, the storm, I lost him in the dust." The man knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "How long ago?" "Yesterday afternoon. He's only 5. His name is Henry." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "He won't survive alone out here." The cowboy stood, surveying the landscape with experienced eyes. "My name's William Ingram. Most folks call me Will." He offered his hand. "I know this land better than most. If your boy's out there, we'll find him." Katherine stared at his outstretched hand for a moment before taking it. His grip was firm and warm, steadying her as she rose to her feet. "Katherine Wilkins," she said. "Why would you help a stranger?" Will's expression softened. "Because no one should face losing a child alone, Mrs. Wilkins, and because I've tracked lost cattle through worse than this." He gestured toward his horse. "If you're able to ride, we can cover more ground together." For the first time since the storm had separated her from Henry, Katherine felt a flicker of something other than despair, not quite hope, but perhaps its distant cousin. Will helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. The proximity felt improper, but propriety seemed meaningless compared to finding Henry. They rode in widening circles from where Katherine had spent the night, Will's eyes constantly scanning the terrain while Katherine called her son's name, until her voice grew hoarse again. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly. Will insisted they stop briefly by a small creek to drink and rest the horse. Katherine could barely swallow the jerky he offered. Her stomach knotted with worry. "How long have you been in these parts?" she asked, needing conversation to distract her from the growing fear that they would never find Henry. "Born and raised," Will replied, filling his canteen from the creek. "My pa ran cattle about 20 miles west of here. I took over when he passed 5 years back." "And your mother?" A shadow crossed his face. "Lost her when I was 10. Fever took her." "I'm sorry," Katherine said, understanding the pain of such loss. Will nodded in acknowledgement. "What brings you to San Antonio, if you don't mind my asking?" Katherine explained about her husband's death and the offer of employment. "I had nowhere else to go," she finished quietly. "Now I've lost everything." Will's eyes met hers, steady and determined. "Not everything, Mrs. Wilkins. Not yet." They continued their search throughout the afternoon, crossing a landscape transformed by the storm. Familiar landmarks had vanished under new dunes of dust, making navigation challenging even for Will. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Katherine's remaining hope diminished with the light. "Perhaps we should return to town," Will suggested gently. "We can gather a proper search party for tomorrow." "No," Katherine said firmly, though exhaustion weighed heavily on her. "I can't leave him out here another night. I won't." Will studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Then we keep looking until dark." The sun had nearly disappeared when Will suddenly reined his horse to a stop, his body tensing. "There," he said, pointing toward what looked like a collapsed structure in the distance. "That old line shack wasn't like that last time I passed through." They approached cautiously. It appeared to have been a small shelter for cowboys working the range, but the roof had partially caved in, likely from the force of the storm. Will dismounted and helped Katherine down before drawing his revolver. "Stay behind me," he instructed. "Could be animals took shelter there." Katherine's heart pounded as they approached the ruined shack. Will called out as they neared the entrance, but no response came. He moved forward, pushing aside a fallen beam to clear the doorway. "Hello," he called again, stepping inside. Katherine followed, squinting in the dim light that filtered through the damaged roof. The interior was a jumble of collapsed beams and scattered supplies. Will moved carefully through the debris, his revolver ready. A soft sound from the corner made them both freeze. Will raised his lantern, illuminating a small bundle pressed against the far wall. Katherine pushed past him with a strangled cry. It wasn't Henry. A young girl no more than 7 or 8 cowered in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "It's all right," Katherine said softly, approaching slowly. "We won't hurt you." The girl stared at them with wide, frightened eyes. "Are you angels?" she whispered. Will holstered his gun and knelt beside Katherine. "No, little one, just folks looking for someone lost in the storm." "What's your name?" "Hope," the girl said after a moment. "Hope Miller." Katherine glanced at Will, her heart twisting with disappointment yet feeling compassion for this lost child. "Are you alone, Hope?" The girl shook her head and pointed toward a small space beneath what remained of a wooden counter. "Not anymore. I found him." Will moved quickly, crouching to peer into the space. His sharp intake of breath made Katherine's heart stop. "Mrs. Wilkins," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "I think I found what you're looking for." Katherine scrambled forward, falling to her knees beside Will. In the narrow space beneath the counter lay a small form curled on his side, dust-covered but unmistakable. "Henry," she cried, reaching for him with trembling hands. The boy stirred at her voice, his eyes fluttering open. "Mama," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. Katherine gathered him into her arms, sobbing with relief as she cradled him against her chest. "My baby, my sweet boy, I thought I'd lost you forever." Will watched them, his own eyes suspiciously bright in the lantern light. Hope crept closer, placing a small hand on Katherine's shoulder. "I found him walking all alone," the girl explained. "He was crying for his mama. I told him he could stay with me until the angels came." Will gently touched the girl's shoulder. "And where's your family, Hope?" The girl's face clouded. "Gone to heaven. Our wagon tipped over in the storm. I ran to find help, but when I came back—" Her voice trailed off and she looked down at her dusty shoes. Will and Katherine exchanged a glance of understanding. Two children, orphaned by circumstance and united by the storm. "You kept my son safe," Katherine said, reaching out to take Hope's hand. "I can never repay you for that." Will checked both children for injuries, finding nothing more serious than scrapes and bruises. Henry had a slight fever, but seemed otherwise unharmed. Hope appeared physically well, though the trauma of losing her family lingered in her eyes. "It's too dark to travel safely tonight," Will said, assessing the damaged shack. "We can shore up this corner for shelter and head to my ranch at first light. It's closer than town." Katherine nodded, still holding Henry tightly. "Whatever you think is best." Will worked quickly to secure their shelter, reinforcing the stable portion of the roof and clearing away dangerous debris. From his saddlebags, he produced a blanket, which he spread out for Katherine and the children. Henry had fallen asleep in his mother's arms, exhausted from his ordeal, while Hope sat close beside them, watching Will's movements with solemn eyes. "You should rest," Will told Katherine as he built a small fire near the doorway. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "I don't think I could sleep," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him disappearing into the dust." Will sat beside the fire, adding small sticks to the flames. "But you found him, or rather, he found a guardian angel." He glanced at Hope, who had finally succumbed to sleep, her head resting against Katherine's arm. "What will happen to her?" Katherine asked quietly. Will's face grew serious. "If she has no family, the orphanage in San Antonio would take her in." Katherine looked down at the sleeping girl, her heart aching. "She saved my son's life." "She's a brave little thing," Will agreed. "Reminds me of my sister at that age, tough as leather but soft inside." "You have a sister," he corrected gently. "She passed some years back, consumption." He poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. "It's just me now." Katherine studied his profile in the firelight, seeing both strength and loneliness etched there. "Thank you," she said after a moment, "for helping me when you had no reason to." Will looked up, his blue eyes reflecting the flames. "There's always reason enough to help someone in need, Mrs. Wilkins." "Katherine," she said. "Please call me Katherine." A small smile touched his lips. "Katherine, then." They fell silent, the crackling of the fire and the soft breathing of the children the only sounds in the night. Despite her protests, exhaustion eventually claimed Katherine, and she drifted into sleep with her son held safe in her arms. Dawn arrived with gentle fingers of light reaching through the damaged roof. Katherine woke to find Will already up, tending to his horse outside. Henry still slept beside her, his small face peaceful, while Hope sat near the doorway, watching the sunrise with quiet wonder. "Good morning," Katherine said softly, careful not to wake Henry. Hope turned, offering a shy smile. "The angels didn't come in the night," she observed. "Angels?" Katherine asked, confused. "For me," Hope explained with the simple logic of childhood. "My mama said angels come for good people when they die. I thought maybe they'd come for me too." Katherine's heart constricted. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, opening her arm in invitation. Hope hesitated only briefly before crawling to her side. "The angels knew you were safe with us." Will entered, carrying a canteen of fresh water. He paused at the sight of Katherine with both children nestled against her, his expression softening. "I found Hope," he said quietly, his eyes meeting Katherine's over the children's heads. Katherine understood his meaning immediately. In the midst of her own desperate search, they had discovered not just her son, but this abandoned child as well, a double finding that seemed beyond coincidence. "Yes," she agreed, smoothing Hope's tangled hair. "You did." They prepared to leave as soon as Henry woke, hungry but in good spirits. Will helped Katherine and the children onto his horse, leading them on foot toward his ranch. The journey took most of the morning, the landscape gradually changing from dusty plains to rolling hills dotted with live oak trees. By midday, a modest ranch house came into view, nestled in a small valley with a barn and corral nearby. "It's not much," Will said as they approached, "but it's home." "It's beautiful," Katherine replied honestly. After the barren emptiness of the previous day, the green pastures and sturdy house seemed like paradise. The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with handcrafted furniture and patterned quilts that spoke of a woman's touch from years past. Will explained that his mother had made most of the furnishings before her death, and he had preserved them as a memorial to her. "The bedroom at the end of the hall was my parents'," he said, showing Katherine through the house. "You and the children can use it. I'll bunk in the spare room." "We can't impose on you like this," Katherine protested. "It's no imposition," Will assured her. "At least until we can figure out what comes next." What came next became the unspoken question hanging between them over the following days. Katherine wrote to her husband's partner in San Antonio, explaining her delayed arrival due to the storm and her son's near loss. She carefully avoided mentioning Hope, uncertain of the girl's future. Will proved himself a generous host and a natural with the children. He showed Henry how to feed the chickens and collect eggs, and he patiently taught Hope to ride his gentlest mare. In the evenings, he would sit on the porch with Katherine after the children were asleep, sharing stories of his life on the ranch and listening to her memories of her husband and their early marriage. "James was a good man," she told Will one evening, a week after their arrival. "He worked hard to provide for us, but mining is dangerous work. I always feared something would happen." "It takes courage to start over," Will observed, "especially with a child." "And now possibly two," Katherine said softly. Will glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "You're considering keeping Hope," Katherine nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about it constantly. She has no one, Will, and she and Henry have become inseparable." She twisted her hands in her lap. "But I don't know if I can support two children on a shop clerk's salary. I don't know if Mr. Dawson would even still hire me with an additional child to care for." Will was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. "There are other possibilities," he finally said. "Such as," he turned to face her, his expression earnest. "This ranch needs a woman's touch, has for years, and those children need space to run and grow." He took a deep breath. I'm not proposing anything improper, Catherine. I have a small cabin about a quarter-mile from here that my foreman used before he married and moved to town. You and the children could live there. You could keep house for me, and I'd ensure you all had everything you needed. Catherine stared at him, surprised by the offer. That's very generous, but just think about it, he interrupted gently. There's no rush to decide. The following day, Will took Catherine to see the cabin. It was small but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms and a cozy front room with a stone fireplace. A vegetable garden, somewhat overgrown but still productive, stretched behind the building. My foreman's wife loved gardening, Will explained as they walked through the rooms. Said she couldn't abide store-bought vegetables when the Texas soil was so rich. Catherine ran her hand along the smooth wooden counter in the kitchen, imagining herself preparing meals here, watching the children play in the yard through the window. It was a tempting picture, far more appealing than the cramped rooms above a general store that she had been expecting in San Antonio. I need to be honest with you, Will, she said, turning to face him. I'm not looking for a husband. James has only been gone 6 months and I'm not asking you to be my wife, Catherine, Will said quickly, though something flickered in his eyes that made her wonder if the thought had crossed his mind. Just offering a safe place for you and the children, a fresh start. Catherine considered his words carefully. And what would people say? A widow and 2 children living on the property of an unmarried man. Will's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Folks around here know me well enough. Besides, my housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, comes in 3 times a week. She's the biggest gossip in the county and also the most God-fearing woman I know. Her presence would satisfy any concerns about propriety. Catherine couldn't help but laugh. You've thought this through. I've had little else to think about, he admitted. This place has been too quiet for too long. Before Catherine could respond, they heard excited voices approaching. Henry and Hope came running around the corner of the cabin, faces flushed with exertion and joy. Mama, Mr. Will showed us the creek where we can catch frogs, Henry exclaimed. And there's fish too. Hope hung back slightly, still cautious in her happiness, but her eyes shone with excitement. There's a willow tree perfect for a swing, she added softly. Catherine looked at their eager faces, then at Will, who watched them with undisguised affection. In that moment, she made her decision. Well, she said, smiling at the children, we'll have to see about putting up that swing, won't we? The children cheered, while Will's face broke into a grin that transformed his weathered features. You'll stay then. We'll stay, Catherine confirmed. At least until we see if this arrangement works for everyone. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as they settled into a routine. Catherine and the children moved into the cabin, which they slowly transformed with small touches: wildflowers in jars on the table, patchwork cushions on the chairs, and drawings by the children pinned to the walls. Will helped her restore the garden, and soon they were harvesting fresh vegetables for their meals. Catherine took over cooking for Will as well, inviting him to dine with them each evening. She discovered he had been surviving primarily on coffee and whatever simple meals he could prepare himself, and she took satisfaction in watching him enjoy her cooking. Mrs. Abernathy, a formidable woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes, approved of the arrangement after subjecting Catherine to a thorough but good-natured interrogation about her background and intentions. That man has been alone too long, she confided to Catherine one afternoon as they kneaded bread dough together. Lost himself when his sister died. You and those children have brought life back to this place. Catherine wasn't sure how to respond to that. She had noticed the change in Will over the weeks, how his somber demeanor had gradually given way to smiles and even occasional laughter, particularly when interacting with the children. She found herself looking forward to their evening conversations on the porch after the children were asleep, where they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. What she didn't want to acknowledge was how her own heart had begun to respond to his presence. It seemed disloyal to James's memory, yet she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her whenever Will was near. Summer progressed into early autumn, bringing cooler evenings and spectacular sunsets that painted the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple. The children thrived in their new environment, Henry growing stronger and more adventurous each day, while Hope gradually shed the layers of grief that had surrounded her, revealing a bright, inquisitive nature beneath. On a particularly beautiful September evening, Will invited Katherine for a ride to show her a special place on his property. The children were happily engaged with Mrs. Abernathy, who had promised to teach them to make cinnamon cookies. They rode side by side, Katherine now comfortable on the gentle mare Will had designated as hers. He led her up a winding path through oak trees until they reached a clearing atop a small hill. Below them, the ranch spread out like a painting, golden in the late afternoon light. "This is where my father proposed to my mother," Will said as they dismounted. "He told me he brought her up here at sunset and promised her all the land she could see would be theirs to share." Katherine looked at him curiously. "That's a lovely story," Will nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "I used to come up here when I was struggling with decisions. Something about seeing everything from above helps clear the mind." They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching as the sun began its descent. Will seemed nervous, repeatedly adjusting his hat and clearing his throat. "Katherine," he finally said, turning to face her, "I need to ask you something." Her pulse quickened. "Yes, these past months have been." He hesitated, searching for words. "They've changed everything for me. Having you and the children here, it's like the ranch has come alive again." He took a deep breath. "I know you said you weren't looking for a husband, and I respect that, but I can't help how I feel." Katherine felt a fluttering sensation in her chest. "Will, I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "I think I started falling that first morning when I saw you crying in the dust. Your strength, your devotion to your son, it moved something in me that I thought had died years ago." Katherine's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," Will assured her, taking her hand gently. "I just needed you to know, and to know that I've come to love those children as if they were my own. Especially Hope, that little girl has captured my heart completely." "She adores you," Katherine said softly. "They both do." Will's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "What I'm trying to say in my clumsy way is that I want to make this arrangement permanent. I want to adopt Hope legally so she'll always have a home and a name, and I want—" He paused, meeting her eyes. "I want to court you properly, Katherine, with the hope that someday when you're ready you might consider becoming my wife." Katherine felt tears spill onto her cheeks. "Will, you don't have to answer now," he said again. "Just think about it, we have time." But Katherine didn't need time. The feelings that had been growing within her feelings she had tried to deny out of loyalty to James suddenly crystallized into certainty. "James would want me to be happy," she said, almost to herself. "He would want Henry to have a father who loves him." "I do love him," Will confirmed. "Both of them." Katherine looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "I think I've been falling in love with you too," she admitted. "I just wasn't ready to acknowledge it." Will's face lit up with hope. "And now I think I'm ready to start looking forward instead of back." She squeezed his hand. "Yes, Will, you can court me. And yes to adopting Hope. She deserves to have a real family again." Will's smile was radiant. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips. It was brief, but in that moment, Katherine felt something heal inside her, a wound she hadn't fully acknowledged. They returned to the ranch as the first stars appeared, riding close enough that their knees occasionally touched. A comfortable silence enveloped them, filled with unspoken promises and newfound hope. The following weeks brought changes both subtle and profound. Will began officially courting Katherine, bringing small gifts when he returned from trips to town, ribbons for her hair, a journal bound in soft leather, wildflower seeds for the garden. They told the children of their intention to adopt Hope, who responded with a joy so intense it brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Does this mean I'll be Hope Ingram?" she asked, her small face serious. "If that's what you'd like," Will confirmed, kneeling to her level. "And will you be my papa?" The question was whispered as if she feared the answer. Will gathered her into his arms. "I would be honored to be your papa, Hope. Nothing would make me prouder." Henry watched this exchange with solemn eyes. Later that evening, as Katherine tucked him into bed, he asked the question she had been anticipating. "If Mr. Will becomes Hope's papa, will he be my papa too?" Katherine sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing his hair. "Would you want that, Henry?" The boy considered carefully. "Pa is in heaven," he said, "but Mr. Will is here and he teaches me things and makes you smile." He looked up at her with his father's eyes. "I think I'd like having a pa again." Katherine kissed his forehead, her heart full. "We'll talk more about it soon. Sleep now, my brave boy." As autumn deepened, preparations began for the adoption. The lawyer in San Antonio required documentation of Hope's circumstances, which proved challenging given the nature of her loss. Will rode to the area where they had found her, eventually locating the remains of the wagon and the tragic evidence of her parents' fate. The Miller family had been traveling from Missouri, based on papers found among their belongings, with no apparent surviving relatives. With this information, the legal process moved forward. Katherine made Hope a new dress for the occasion, and Will carved a special wooden box where the girl could keep her few mementos of her birth parents, a locket with a tiny portrait, her mother's handkerchief, and a small Bible with the family names inscribed inside. The day before they were to travel to San Antonio for the adoption proceedings, Will took Katherine for another ride to their special hilltop. The November afternoon was crisp but sunny, the landscape transformed by autumn colors. "I've been thinking," Will said as they stood looking over the ranch. "Tomorrow Hope becomes officially part of our family." "Yes," Katherine agreed, smiling at the thought. The past few months had brought them all closer, creating bonds that felt increasingly like those of a true family. "I'd like to make it official for all of us," Will continued, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and emptied its contents into his palm, a gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained, holding it out to Katherine. "Pa gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for when I found someone who made me as happy as my mother made him." He took a deep breath. "Katherine Wilkins, will you marry me and make this family complete?" Katherine looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, this man who had followed her tracks through the dust and brought Hope back into her life in more ways than one. The answer was as clear as the Texas sky above them. "Yes," she said simply, her heart too full for elaborate speeches. "Yes, Will, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. Their kiss was deeper this time, a promise of the life they would build together. They decided to wait until spring for the wedding, giving themselves time to prepare and allowing Katherine to honor the full year of mourning for James. The adoption proceeded as planned, with Hope officially becoming Hope Miller Ingram in a brief but emotional ceremony at the courthouse in San Antonio. To celebrate, Will took them all to dinner at the Grand Menger Hotel, where Hope and Henry marveled at the crystal chandeliers and fine china. Winter brought occasional storms that howled around the cabin, but inside, the small family created warmth that defied the weather. Christmas was a joyous affair, with handmade gifts exchanged around a pine tree Will and the children had selected and decorated. Katherine found herself watching Will's face as often as the children's, moved by the pure happiness she saw there. One evening in January, as they sat before the fire after the children had gone to bed, Will took her hand, his expression thoughtful. "I was thinking about names," he said. "Names." Katherine repeated, puzzled. "For the ranch," he clarified. "It's always just been the Ingram place, but it deserves a proper name, especially now that it's becoming home to a proper family." Katherine considered for a moment. "What about Hope Ranch?" she suggested. "It seems fitting, given everything." Will's smile told her she had chosen perfectly. "Hope Ranch it is," he agreed, lifting her hand to his lips. February brought an unexpected letter from Mr. Dawson, Katherine's husband's former partner. Having heard nothing from Katherine since her initial letter explaining her delay, he had assumed she had found other arrangements. He wrote now to inform her that he had sold the general store and was moving to California. But enclosed was a bank draft, James's final pay, and a small share of the business sale that he felt belonged to James's widow. The unexpected windfall allowed Katherine to order fabric for her wedding dress and new clothes for the children. Will insisted she save the rest for herself, but Katherine had other ideas. One afternoon, she asked Will to accompany her to town, where she deposited most of the money in an account designated for the children's education. "They should have every opportunity," she explained to Will as they left the bank. "Henry talks of becoming a doctor, and Hope has a quick mind for numbers. Who knows what they might achieve with proper schooling?" Will's response was to pull her close and kiss her right on San Antonio's Main Street, heedless of the scandalized glances from passing ladies. "You are a remarkable woman, Katherine Wilkins," he said when they parted. "I am the luckiest man in Texas." As winter gave way to spring, wedding preparations intensified. The ceremony would be small, just a few neighbors and friends, with Mrs. Abernathy overseeing the refreshments and fussing over every detail as if Katherine were her own daughter. Hope was to be the flower girl, a role she took with utmost seriousness, practicing her walk daily. Henry would carry the rings, proudly standing beside Will as his best man. The night before the wedding, Katherine sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the stars emerge in the deepening twilight. The children were asleep, exhausted from the excitement of the rehearsal and the arrival of guests. "May I join you?" Will's voice came from the darkness. "Of course." She moved over on the bench to make room for him. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, only half joking. Katherine turned to him, her face serious in the faint light. "Not one," she assured him. "But I have been thinking about how strange life's path can be, if that dust storm hadn't come." She shuddered slightly at the memory. Will took her hand. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be, like finding hope, exactly like that." He gazed out at the darkened landscape of what would soon be their shared home. "I followed your tracks through the dust that day because I couldn't bear the thought of someone suffering alone. I had no idea I was tracking my own future." Katherine leaned her head against his shoulder. "Tomorrow I become Mrs. Ingram," she said softly. "And I become the happiest man alive," Will replied, kissing the top of her head. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. Katherine dressed in her new gown of pale blue silk, simple but elegant, with pearl buttons down the back that Hope helped fasten with careful fingers. Mrs. Abernathy arranged Catherine's hair, weaving white blossoms through the golden-brown strands. "You look like an angel," Hope breathed when Catherine was ready, her eyes wide with admiration. "The prettiest mama ever," Henry agreed, handsome in his new suit with his hair slicked down. The ceremony took place under the sprawling oak tree near the main house, where lanterns had been hung from the branches and wooden benches arranged for the guests. Reverend Collins from the church in town officiated, his weathered face beaming as Will and Catherine spoke their vows. "I, William James Ingram, take thee, Katherine Elizabeth Wilkins, to be my lawfully wedded wife." Will's voice carried clearly in the spring air, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Catherine repeated the words, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. When she spoke the final promise, "till death do us part," she saw tears shining in Will's eyes. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Collins pronounced, "I now declare you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled broadly. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Ingram." Will gathered Catherine into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of both passion and reverence. The small gathering of guests applauded, but Catherine barely heard them, lost in the moment and the man who was now her husband. A simple but joyous reception followed, with tables set up in the yard, and Mrs. Abernathy's famous fried chicken, biscuits, and peach cobbler served to appreciative guests. Hope and Henry ran among the adults, collecting congratulations for their new family, their faces flushed with happiness. As the celebration continued into early evening, Will found Catherine standing alone for a moment, watching the children play with the neighbor's dog. "Mrs. Ingram," he said, offering his arm, "might I have this dance?" Though there was no formal dancing area, several couples had begun swaying to the music provided by a local fiddler. Will led Catherine to join them, drawing her close as they moved in time to the gentle melody. "Are you happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Completely," she answered, resting her head against his chest. "Are you?" "Beyond words." His arms tightened around her. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again after losing my family. You and the children have given me back something I thought was gone forever." "And you gave us a home when we had nowhere to go," Catherine reminded him. "You followed my tracks through the dust and found not just Henry but all of us." As the music continued, they were joined on their impromptu dance floor by Henry and Hope, who circled around them laughing. Will reached out, gathering both children into their embrace, the four of them swaying together as a family finally complete. Later that night, after the guests had departed, and the children were asleep in the main house under Mrs. Abernathy's watchful eye, Will carried Catherine across the threshold of what would now be their shared bedroom. They came together as husband and wife, discovering each other with gentle hands and whispered words of love, their bond deepening with each tender caress. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay entwined in the moonlight filtering through the curtains, Catherine traced the line of Will's jaw with her fingertips. "I never expected to find love again," she confessed. "After James died, I thought that part of my life was over. And now—" Will caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Now I understand that the heart has an endless capacity for love. It doesn't diminish what I felt for James to love you completely." Will's smile was soft in the darkness. "You are the strongest woman I've ever known, Katherine Ingram." She liked the sound of her new name on his lips. "We're all stronger together," she said, thinking of the family they had forged from loss and tragedy. "You, me, Henry, and Hope." "Hope," Will repeated, drawing Catherine closer against him. "She was well named, wasn't she?" Perfectly named, Katherine agreed, closing her eyes as sleep began to claim her. Our family's guardian angel. Spring flowed into summer, and the rhythm of ranch life continued with new harmony. Katherine and the children moved from the cabin to the main house, though they kept the smaller dwelling prepared for guests. Under Katherine's care, the house bloomed with new life curtains at the windows, flowers on the tables, and the constant bustle of family activity. Will expanded the garden, adding fruit trees and berry bushes at Katherine's request. Together they planned improvements to the ranch, discussing each decision as equal partners. The cattle business prospered under Will's experienced management, allowing them to hire additional help and ensuring their financial security. The children thrived in their new environment. Henry, now 6, began his schooling with Katherine as his teacher, showing a quick mind and insatiable curiosity. Hope, 8 and growing tall, revealed a natural affinity for horses, spending hours with Will learning to care for the animals. Both children absorbed the values their parents modeled: hard work, kindness, and the importance of family bonds. In late summer, Katherine discovered she was expecting a child. She shared the news with Will on their hilltop, watching his face transform with wonder and joy. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." The children received the news with excitement, immediately beginning debates about names and whether they wanted a brother or sister. Hope took to placing her ear against Katherine's abdomen, claiming she could hear the baby talking. "What does the baby say?" Will asked her once, amused by her earnestness. "That it's happy," Hope replied with absolute certainty, "and that it can't wait to meet its papa." As Katherine's pregnancy progressed, the family prepared for the new arrival. Will converted a small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls himself and crafting a cradle from oak harvested on their land. Katherine and Hope sewed baby clothes and blankets, while Henry solemnly promised to be the best big brother ever. Winter arrived with gentle rains instead of dust storms, the land green and lush compared to the previous year. Katherine, now in her final month of pregnancy, often reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. From the despair of that dawn when she had thought Henry lost forever to the contentment of her present life seemed an impossible journey, yet here she was surrounded by love and anticipation. The baby arrived on a clear February morning in 1877, almost exactly a year after Katherine had received the unexpected inheritance from Mr. Dawson. After a night of labor supported by Will's steady presence and Mrs. Abernathy's experienced assistance, Katherine gave birth to a healthy son with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair. "He has your eyes," she told Will tiredly as he cradled his newborn son with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "And your strength," Will replied, bending to kiss her damp forehead. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names but had not settled on a final choice. Now, looking at the tiny face of their son, Katherine knew. "James William Ingram," she said softly. "To honor the past and celebrate the future." Will's smile told her he approved. "Welcome to the world, James William," he whispered to his son. "You have quite a family waiting to meet you." Henry and Hope were permitted to visit briefly, their faces awestruck as they peered at their new brother. Hope reached out a cautious finger to touch the baby's tiny hand, gasping with delight when he grasped her finger reflexively. "He knows I'm his sister," she declared. "Of course he does," Will assured her. "Family always recognizes family." In the days that followed, the household adjusted to the rhythms of life with a newborn. Katherine recovered quickly, grateful for the support of Will and Mrs. Abernathy, who stayed at the ranch temporarily to help with household duties. The older children took their new responsibilities seriously. With Henry reading stories to baby James and Hope singing lullabies, she composed herself. On a mild spring evening when James was 3 months old, the family gathered on the porch after dinner. The baby slept in Catherine's arms while Henry and Hope played a quiet game of checkers under Will's supervision. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, creating a tableau of domestic peace. "I was thinking," Will said casually, moving one of his checkers. "The south pasture would make a good spot for a schoolhouse." Katherine looked up, intrigued. "A schoolhouse," Will nodded, his eyes on the game but his mind clearly elsewhere. "There are 6 families within riding distance with children of school age. None of them can afford to send their children all the way to town for proper schooling." "You're suggesting we build a school on our land," Katherine clarified, her interest growing. "With you as the teacher if you'd be willing," Will confirmed, finally meeting her gaze. "At least until James is older and requires more attention, or until we can hire a proper schoolmistress." Katherine considered the idea, excitement building within her. Before her marriage, she had briefly taught at a small school in her hometown. The prospect of returning to teaching while still being close to her family was appealing. "I think it's a wonderful idea," she said warmly. "Every child deserves an education." Will smiled, clearly pleased by her enthusiasm. "I thought we might start with the basics, a simple building with desks and a stove for winter. The neighbors could help with the construction if we provide the materials. And I could help teach the little ones." Hope interjected, having abandoned the checkers game to listen to the adults' conversation. "I'm very good at letters and numbers." "You certainly are," Katherine agreed, touched by the girl's eagerness to contribute. "You'd make an excellent assistant teacher." "What about me?" Henry asked, not wanting to be left out. "You, young man, would be one of the students," Will told him, ruffling his hair affectionately. "Though I suspect you'll be at the head of the class in no time." As the family continued discussing the schoolhouse plans, Katherine marveled at how naturally they had all come together, Henry with his father's thoughtful nature, Hope with her resilient spirit, baby James with his sweet temperament, and Will, the man who had followed her tracks through the dust and found not just her lost child, but a way to heal all their broken hearts. The schoolhouse became a reality by the following autumn. A simple but sturdy structure with large windows to catch the sunlight and a small bell tower that could be heard across the pastures. Families from miles around brought their children on the first day, some riding for hours for the opportunity to receive an education. Katherine stood at the front of the room that first morning, watching as 15 children of various ages settled at their desks. Hope, now 9, sat proudly at a small table to the side, ready to help with the youngest students. Henry, 7 and growing tall like his stepfather, sat in the front row, his slate and pencil arranged precisely before him. "Welcome to Hope Ranch School," Katherine began, her voice clear in the hushed room. "Today we begin a journey together, a journey of discovery and learning." From the doorway, Will watched with baby James on his hip, pride evident in his expression. Katherine caught his eye and smiled, silently acknowledging the gift he had given not just to their family, but to the entire community. The school flourished under Katherine's guidance, becoming a centerpiece of local life. Families gathered there not just for education, but for social events, holiday celebrations, and community meetings. Will added a small library wing the following year, stocked with books ordered from catalogs and donated by wealthier families in San Antonio. Life settled into a pattern of purposeful activity and deep contentment for the Ingram family. The ranch prospered, allowing them to improve their home and expand their operations. They added a dairy, an orchard, and eventually a small gristmill that served the surrounding farms. 2 years after James's birth, Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose Eliza for short. The family was now complete, 4 children spanning a decade in age, each with their own distinct personality, but bound together by the love that suffused their home. Hope, growing into a lovely young woman, maintained her special bond with Will, often accompanying him on his rides around the property and absorbing his knowledge of ranching. Her tragic beginning had left its mark in a certain seriousness beyond her years, but her capacity for joy remained boundless, especially when surrounded by family. Henry developed his father's methodical nature and his mother's compassion, excelling in his studies and declaring his intention to become a doctor with increasing conviction as he grew older. Will started a special fund for Henry's medical education, adding to it regularly with the proceeds from cattle sales. James, a robust and cheerful boy, showed early signs of his father's affinity for the land and animals. By the age of 5, he could already ride independently and knew the names of every cow in the herd. Eliza, with her mother's golden brown hair and her father's blue eyes, charmed everyone she met with her quick wit and infectious laugh. Through the years, Katherine and Will's love deepened, strengthened by shared joys and the occasional challenges that life inevitably brought: drought seasons that threatened the cattle, a fire that damaged part of the barn, childhood illnesses that kept them awake through worrying nights. Through it all, they remained partners in every sense, their bond unshakable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Will surprised Katherine with a journey back to their special hilltop. Though they still visited it occasionally, their busy lives meant such quiet moments alone were rare treasures. He arranged for Mrs. Abernathy, now semi-retired but still devoted to the family, to watch the younger children, while Hope, now 18 and capable as any adult, oversaw the household. "It seems like yesterday," Katherine mused as they stood together looking out over the ranch, now expanded and improved almost beyond recognition from when she had first seen it. "That first time you brought me here and told me about your parents." Will wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Some days it feels like yesterday, and others it feels like we've always been together." Katherine leaned back against him, content in his embrace. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day?" "I try not to think about it," Will admitted. "The idea of never knowing you, never having our family." He tightened his hold slightly. "It doesn't bear considering." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the land in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, the ranch building stood solid and welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney of their home, the schoolhouse bell tower catching the last rays of light. "I brought you something," Will said eventually, releasing her to reach into his pocket. He withdrew a small box and handed it to her. Katherine opened it to find a locket of polished silver. Inside was a tiny portrait of their family, all 6 of them arranged before the ranch house, their faces bright with happiness. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tracing the engraved pattern on the cover. "Turn it over," Will instructed softly. On the back, delicate script spelled out the words, "I found hope." Katherine looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "Those were the first words you ever said to me that gave me reason to believe Henry might be alive." Will nodded, taking the locket to fasten it around her neck. "Little did I know how prophetic they would be. I found hope, the child who became our daughter. I found hope for myself when I'd resigned myself to solitude. And together, we built a place where others could find hope too." Katherine touched the locket where it rested against her heart. "From despair to joy," she murmured. "That's been our journey." And it's not over yet, Will reminded her, drawing her close again. We have years ahead of us, children to raise, grandchildren to spoil someday. Katherine laughed at the thought. Hope is already receiving attention from the Tanner boy. Grandchildren might not be so far in the future. Heaven help us, Will groaned, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. I'm not nearly old enough to be called grandpa. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they made their way back down the hill toward home, walking hand in hand through the land they had nurtured together. Lights glowed in the windows of the ranch house, and as they drew closer, they could hear the sound of laughter, their children welcoming them back. We found more than hope, Katherine said softly as they paused at the threshold of their home. We found everything that matters. Will lifted her hand to his lips, his eyes reflecting the same certainty she felt. And we'll keep finding it every day together. They stepped inside, closing the door behind them, welcomed by the embrace of the family they had built from the ashes of loss and the dust of despair, a family founded on love, strengthened by hope, and destined to thrive in the fertile soil of the home they had created together.